In 2015, a genome extracted from a Bronze Age burial in Cambridgeshire came back with a population signal that the analysts could not place. The ancestry profile did not resolve cleanly into any of the known European source populations. Not Yamnaya steppe, not Anatolian farmer, not Western hunter-gatherer, not in the expected ratios, not in any combination the standard models predicted. The lab flagged it. The result held. And then, 7 years later, the largest ancient DNA survey of Britain ever conducted, 793 ancient individuals, published in Nature in 2022, found the same signal again. Broader, mapped, structurally present across Bronze Age and Iron Age samples from eastern and southeastern England. The researchers named it. They measured its distribution. They confirmed it was not a processing error, not contamination, not a statistical ghost from some computational artifact. It was a real ancestral component, present in real people, carried forward into the modern English genome. And then the paper did something remarkable. It left the question open. Because the population that produced this signal has no confirmed name, no confirmed burial ground, no confirmed archaeological identity, it is in the data. It survived peer review, and no one can tell you where it came from. To understand why that is so difficult to accept, you need to understand how confident the standard model actually is. The accepted story of who the English are is not a rough sketch. It is one of the most thoroughly tested population histories in ancient genomics. Britain was settled after the last glacial maximum by Mesolithic hunter-gatherers, people whose genome profile belongs to what researchers call Western hunter-gatherers, a well-characterized ancestral group found across post-glacial Europe. Then, around 4000 BCE, Neolithic farmers arrived from Anatolia, slowly replacing much of the hunter-gatherer population and spreading the agricultural way of life that would build the long barrows, the causewayed enclosures, and eventually the early phases of Stonehenge. Then came the third wave, the most dramatic of all, when bell beaker-associated populations carrying steppe ancestry from the Pontic-Caspian grasslands swept into Britain around 2500 BCE and replaced approximately 90% of the existing population in what amounts to one of the most complete demographic overturns in European prehistory. 3 waves, each confirmed by independent ancient DNA labs, each replicated across dozens of burial sites from Cornwall to Yorkshire. This is not conjecture. The evidence for it is extraordinary, which is exactly what makes the fourth signal so difficult to absorb. The model is not weak, and the signal does not fit inside it. The paper at the center of this is Patterson et al., published in Nature in 2022, under the title Large-Scale Migration into Britain During the Middle to Late Bronze Age. The headline finding, a substantial continental migration into Britain during the Middle Bronze Age, bringing yet more steppe-related ancestry, was significant enough on its own. But running beneath that headline, visible in the dataset, was an ancestry component that the authors could not fully resolve against any known source population. They flagged it in the language researchers use when something real is present but not yet explained. Further work required, source population unidentified, component noted for future analysis. The anomaly did not disappear when later studies reanalyzed the data. It did not collapse when critics examined the methodology. The signal is there, the source population is not. That gap between a measured signal and missing people is what makes this a genuine open question, rather than a curiosity from a preliminary study. Before going further, it is worth being precise about what ghost population actually means in the technical literature, because the term sounds more dramatic than the reality it describes. A ghost population is a group inferred from the statistical signal it left in the genomes of its descendants, but whose own skeletal remains have not yet been found or sampled. The concept is not fringe. It has a strong methodological pedigree. The ancestral North Eurasian component, a deep ancestry signal found across Eurasia, was identified as a ghost population before the discovery of the Malta boy, a 24,000-year-old individual from Siberia, whose genome confirmed the source. The basal Eurasian component, visible in early European farmers, still lacks a fully confirmed source population, though the search continues. In both cases, the signal in the descendants was real before the source was found. The British ghost component follows the same logic. The methodology is not the weakness. The missing people are the weakness, and the absence has a shape. That shape becomes visible when you map where the signal appears and where it does not. Across the ancient British dataset, the unresolved component is concentrated in eastern and southeastern England. It is weaker or absent in Scotland, Wales, and the western regions of Britain, where Neolithic and steppe ancestry profiles are more clearly resolved and less anomalous. The signal intensifies in Bronze Age and early Iron Age samples, reaching a temporal peak precisely during the period when the bell beaker replacement was still settling out. A processing artifact would not produce that. A contamination event would not produce a geographically coherent distribution that strengthens in one direction and fades in another. A pattern like that implies a real population event with a real direction of arrival. The geographic patterning is noted in the supplementary data of the 2022 study, not the headline, but present in the numbers. And the direction the pattern points is east, toward the North Sea coast, toward the shallow waters of the southern North Sea basin, toward a landscape that no longer exists above water. Between roughly 10,000 and 6,200 BCE, the landmass now called Doggerland connected Britain to the European continent. It was not a narrow land bridge. It was a substantial territory, river valleys, wetland systems, elevated plateaus, estuarine shorelines, occupying what is now the southern and central North Sea. Sonar mapping and seismic surveys conducted by teams from Imperial College London and the University of Bradford, with a major reconstruction published in 2012, revealed a landscape that would have been among the most resource-rich environments in post-glacial northwestern Europe. The rivers that ran across it drained into the Atlantic. The wetlands would have supported enormous populations of fish, waterfowl, and large mammals. This was not marginal territory. It was the geographic center of what is now northwestern Europe, and it was inhabited. Worked flint tools, barbed antler points, and Mesolithic faunal remains have been pulled from North Sea trawler nets for more than a century. Fragmentary human bones have been dredged from the North Sea floor, including material associated with what researchers informally call the Tilbury Man, and similar isolated finds. The population that lived in Doggerland was real. It occupied this landscape for thousands of years during the critical period when European populations were in motion. Then, around 6,200 BCE, the Storegga Slide, a catastrophic submarine landslide off the Norwegian continental shelf, triggered a tsunami that is estimated to have accelerated the final inundation of Doggerland. The landscape did not slowly recede. Large portions of it were submerged in geological time that, from a human perspective, was sudden. The people who lived there lost the center of their world. And their genetic contribution to Britain has never been fully mapped, because the evidence is on the seafloor, under 40 meters of cold water. The ghost signal is not simply the Mesolithic British population persisting through the Bronze Age disruptions. That possibility has been examined. Cheddarman, the 9,000-year-old individual from Somerset, whose genome was analyzed by the Natural History Museum and University College London in 2018, has a Western hunter-gatherer profile consistent with other Mesolithic British and European samples. Dark skin, blue eyes, a genetic signature well characterized by now across dozens of comparable individuals from the same period. The unresolved Bronze Age component does not match that WHG profile cleanly. It is something different. It has a different distribution, a different timeline of appearance, and a different geographic concentration. The ghost signal is not old British ancestry quietly surviving in the East. It is something else arriving or persisting in a way that the three-wave model does not account for. This is where the timing becomes its own problem. The bell beaker replacement, that near-total demographic overturning of Neolithic Britain, happened approximately 2,500 to 2000 BCE. Pre-bell beaker, Britain was dominated by Anatolian farmer ancestry. The people who built the early phases of Stonehenge, who maintained the long barrow burial tradition, who left the causewayed enclosures across southern Britain, their genetic profile was largely erased. Post-Bell Beaker Britain was restructured around steppe ancestry, and that restructuring was so thorough that only a thin residual trace of Anatolian farmer ancestry survived in the population. For the ghost component to appear in post-Bell Beaker samples, which it does, it either survived that near-total replacement in significant enough numbers to remain statistically detectable, or it arrived from outside Britain during or after the transition. Neither explanation is settled. Both are difficult. A signal that persists through a 90% population turnover had to have been either numerically substantial, geographically isolated enough to be missed by the replacement wave, or reintroduced from an external source precisely when the existing population structure was being dismantled. The 2022 study authors flagged the component as requiring further resolution. The replacement event did not erase it. Something survived or something arrived, and the record does not yet say which. The search for a continental match has narrowed the problem without solving it. When the unresolved component is compared against ancient genomes from Denmark, the Netherlands, northern Germany, and coastal Scandinavia, partial overlaps emerge with the genomic profiles of the Ertebølle culture, the coastal hunter-gatherer fishers of the southern Baltic, dated from 5,300 BCE to 3,950 BCE. Ertebølle populations are notable in the ancient DNA record for their resistance to full replacement by the incoming Anatolian farmers. In coastal and estuarine zones, Ertebølle-related groups maintain distinct genetic signatures considerably longer than inland European populations. The partial overlap between the British ghost signal and these coastal northern European groups does not confirm identity, but it narrows the search corridor toward populations adapted to the coastal margins of the southern North Sea basin, the exact zone where Doggerland once sat. The crucial gap in the comparison is obvious. Ancient genomes from the submerged coastal zones of the southern North Sea, Doggerland itself, are largely unobtainable. The closest genetic neighbors to the anomalous signal are the people who lived nearest to the drowned world. The comparison sharpens the problem rather than resolving it, and it points toward a zone that cannot currently be excavated. At this point, it is worth pausing on the precedent for what ancient DNA has already done to British prehistory, because the scale of the current anomaly needs context. Before 2015, mainstream archaeology largely assumed that the Bell Beaker phenomenon represented cultural diffusion, the movement of a prestige object and associated practices across Europe, with relatively modest population movement. Pots moved, not people, was the dominant framework. Then Hock et al., published in Nature in 2015, changed that completely. The genomic data showed that the Bell Beaker transition in Britain involved one of the most dramatic population replacements in European prehistory. A conclusion that had seemed too radical for serious consideration became within a few years settled history. The lesson is not that everything is always more dramatic than we thought. The lesson is that the genomic record of Britain has already forced one major rewrite of the standard model, a rewrite that overturned decades of archaeological consensus, and the record is still being built. The ghost component is a smaller signal than the Bell Beaker replacement, but the Bell Beaker replacement was also once an unresolved anomaly in the data before it became accepted fact. The question is not whether genomic evidence can rewrite British prehistory again. It already has. The question is whether it is in the process of doing so now. The reason this has not been resolved is structural, not conspiratorial. Ancient DNA extracted from waterlogged or marine context degrades far more severely than DNA from dry terrestrial burials. The sediment conditions of the North Sea floor are hostile to nucleic acid preservation. The trawler recovered material from Doggerland is fragmentary and context poor, recovered without stratigraphic information, often damaged, sometimes identified only after years in a museum collection. Underwater archaeological sites in British territorial waters are legally protected under heritage legislation that requires licensing for any deliberate excavation, and the logistical cost of systematic underwater archaeology at North Sea depths is considerable. Most critically, the ancient DNA sampling effort for Britain has concentrated on terrestrial burial sites, the Long Barrows, Bronze Age round barrows, Iron Age inhumations that are physically accessible and legally straightforward to sample, coastal and estuarine populations, and anything associated with the drowned margins of Britain's prehistory are dramatically underrepresented in the existing dataset. This is not evidence being suppressed. It is evidence that is physically difficult to reach and has not yet been systematically sought. The absence of resolution is not the same as absence of signal. The signal is confirmed. The source population remains structurally out of reach with the tools currently being deployed. What the collective evidence implies, the ghost signal, its geographic concentration in eastern England, the Doggerland habitation record, the partial matches with coastal northern European populations, the timing relative to the Bell-Beaker transition, is a population that occupied Doggerland and the adjacent estuarine zones of eastern Britain for several thousand years during and after the Mesolithic. A group partially distinct from the inland western hunter-gatherer populations, possibly more mobile, more seafaring, more adapted to the dynamic coastal and wetland environments that Doggerland provided. A group that contributed a genetic signal to the ancestry of people in eastern Britain, where that signal still shows up in the modern English genome. A group that left almost no named archaeological culture, no identified burial tradition, no confirmed skeletal series, not because they did not exist, but because most of their territory is now under 20 to 40 meters of the North Sea. This is not a claim that a lost civilization built monuments or developed a complex state. It is a claim that a real human population occupied a real landscape, participated in the population history of Britain, and contributed something measurable to the ancestry of one of the most studied nations on Earth, and is currently invisible in the record for a reason that is entirely physical and entirely measurable. What remains sealed is not metaphorical. The University of Bradford's Doggerland project continues to produce detailed topographic and hydrological reconstructions of the submerged landscape using seismic survey and sediment core data. The landscape mapping is advancing, but the excavation is not. Brown Bank in the central North Sea is a known concentration of Mesolithic faunal material and artifactual remains, and human bones have been recovered from it. Full ancient DNA analysis of all available Brown Bank material has not been published as of the current literature. Sediment core sampling from the North Sea floor for environmental ancient DNA, which could in principle detect the presence of human genetic material in sediment layers without recovering intact skeletal remains, has been proposed as a methodological approach, but has not been systematically executed at the scale required to address the population question. In modern English population genetics databases, the ghost component persists. It has not been explained away by newer models. It is not resolved into one of the known source populations under revised analytical frameworks. The tools that might eventually answer the question exist, but the sampling effort required to deploy them has not been made. Every person with deep English ancestry carries, in their genome, a statistical trace of a population that has no confirmed name, no confirmed burial ground, no confirmed stone monument, no confirmed tool tradition that has been separated from the surrounding archaeological noise and attributed to them specifically. Only a signal in the data, mapped, measured, peer-reviewed, and a geographic shape that points toward a landscape that stopped being above water approximately 8,200 years ago. The 2022 Nature study, the most comprehensive ancient DNA survey of Britain ever published, lists the component, maps its distribution, and does not explain it. The North Sea holds sonar returns over drowned river channels, sediment cores over submerged wetlands, Brown Bank coordinates where trawlers pulled up antler and bone and fragment. A population that participated in the making of England is currently known only by its absence from every model that was supposed to account for it. The question is not whether they existed. The signal confirms they did. The question is what we call them, where precisely they came from, and why every geographic indicator in the data points toward a world that is no longer there to excavate.